does Vygotsky deserve as much credit as we think he does? And I ask this because, or did he simply take the Hegelian method and just map it on top of psychology?
This is a very interesting question. What is that Hegelian?
And keep in mind, I hardly know what I'm talking about as I ask
No,
this,
yeah,
but still.
well, yeah. That's why you're asking.
Right.
So, what does it mean, Hegelian method? Okay, because when you ask this question, people give you 1 million different answers. What is Hegelian method? Because dialectics itself has a long history from ancient Greece through the Dark Ages to Hegel, and then to Kant, and then to Marx, and others, and Ilyenkov. So we cannot say it's a Hegelian method. We can say the dialectical method is more accurate. But of course, Hegel was and still is a key figure in that. So therefore, when you say Hegelian method, it's also okay. But by saying Hegelian method, we mean a general dialectical method based on this. So, and Vygotsky in several times, in different times of his life, from the very beginning up to the very end, repeatedly and systematically was saying that we need to apply dialectical method to psychology. Psychology should use the dialectical method. And traditional psychology is not good because it's non-dialectical or anti-dialectical. So from the very beginning up to the very end, so that was one of his ideas. But for philosophy, dialectics is a method of thinking. This is method of analysis. Why? Because there is an objective dialectics, as you know. Objective dialectics is that the all processes of development of all systems are objective. So law of contradiction is objective law, as objective as a law of Newton or Darwin or evolution. Okay, so, and dialectical method is when the researcher or the scientist or the scholar or the academic consciously applies this to organize his own mind. It's a kind of subjective dialectics. Subjective dialectics is that we are applying our knowledge of dialectics when we studying the processes. Okay. We understand the processes because we understand the objective dialectics. So this is a kind of method of cognition.
Okay.
Okay. For philosophy,
is it similar to a framework? Is it similar to a filter or a lens, or is it bigger than that?
It's a kind of logic.
Okay.
We apply to understand, and we can even predict what will be the next because we know the logic of development. Okay. We understand that combination of quantitative change sooner or later will bring to qualitative leap. We don't know when, we don't know how, but we know that it will happen.
I have a very brief question, just to interject. So let's say you have a nation or a body of people, and the composition starts to change. The actual quantitative composition of who exists there, or even the number. Maybe the number gets larger. Is there like some sort of slow progress where it hits a tipping point where all of a sudden the quality is going to change?
That's interesting question, but your question is not about dialectical system. Dialectics is not applicable to everything. If you look on the table or on the computer, you don't need dialectics to understand how the computer works. Dialectics is the logic which was created to be applied for development of certain systems, which is called organical systems. Organical, not biological, but the systems which develop in the course of time. Hegel called them living systems or totalities.
Okay, so something like demographics wouldn't really be appropriate for this.
For example, society.
Mm.
The whole society is the system, and a society is a system of interactions and relationship between people. Society is not just number of people. Society is a system of more complex or less complex system of interactions, relations between the people. The complexity of the society is not about, in that society there is more people, there is less people. No, complexity of the society is how complex the relations are. Okay, so for example, the Lego, let's take Lego as an example. Okay, so you can build a big construction from Lego blocks, but dialectically it will be a very simple system. Why simple? Because all Lego parts are related, connected to each other by only one mechanical way. There is no other way. Of course, it depends on how we put, but the principle, the nature of the connection is all the same.
Yeah, and they're sort of interchangeable also. And and if you remove one of them, the system's not going to fall apart.
Yes, and this is the example of mechanical system. So there is no dialectically there is no complexity in this system. But for usual minds, for on everyday level, if you show to people the small construction of Lego and a big construction, they say, oh, this is more complex, right? Because it's bigger. But dialectically, they are the same, okay? So the same society, if society involves a lot of people, but the relationships with them are very simple. So it's a simple system. If the society includes the relationship which are hierarchical, different types, this is a complex society. So this is a difference between mechanical systems and organical systems. Organical, not in the sense of biological, of course. So that's the whole book of Hegel called Phenomenology of Spirit is about that. In chapter 1 of the Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel differentiates two types of systems: mechanical systems and organical systems, organical live systems. So what's the difference? The difference is that mechanical systems are very simple. They might be complex, but you are right. Parts might be replaced. You can take one part and put them another. Organical systems are different because at certain period of time, the system generates its parts from itself. Like the tree begins to generate the leaves. Mechanical systems cannot do this. The only new part is the part you put it, replacing the old one, broken one. Like in your car, like a mechanic in a car, taking away the old part and putting the new one. So the car itself cannot generate any new parts.
What are maybe 2 or 3 other examples of an organical system? The human body.
Human body?
Yeah.
Consciousness, human mind, is an example of organical system. Our consciousness, our mind.
I have a question for you. I've been thinking about this. Do you know the passage where Vygotsky says pretty much like the development of higher mental functions includes a qualitative reorganization of elementary functions?
Yes.
That now operate according to new
yes,
laws?
Absolutely.
Okay, so is that an example of the organical system sort of creating something new?
Yes, this is an example of organical system, because if you look on the organical system, you can see that organical system involves in itself certain mechanical systems. Look at our body. We have a lot of mechanisms in our body, like our lungs. It's like a pump. Look at our heart as an organ, biological organ. It's a pump, boom, 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 very mechanical. It works very, very mechanically, right? So every organical system also has components of mechanical systems. So, and our mind also, lower elementary functions are becoming to be included into the higher one.
Yeah. Okay.
In
So
a
that's
new
what I was
higher,
going to ask you.
yeah, yeah. So they begin to be subordinated.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is I'm coming to the question. So this is the method of thinking in philosophy, dialectics, method of thinking about organical systems, given that they are always in the process of development. They are always, every organical system is always in the process of development, which means that it remains the same. At the same time, it becomes different. So for Hegel, being of organical system is becoming. Every organical system always becomes something else. Of course, it goes slowly.
For better or worse, yes?
For better or worse, yeah. for more differentiated.
And does regression count as a form of development?
Of course, regression is one of these. Might be, and in relation to human minds, there is a paper of Vygotsky, unfortunately not published in English, not translated in English, which is called the process of disintegration of higher psychological functions. So there might be integration and disintegration, depending on the situation. So this is the method for philosophy. But for psychology, it cannot be a method. It should be methodology.
Okay. Before you go there, what are a couple other methods that exist for thinking about organical systems? What are some other competing methods out there?
I'm not a philosopher, sorry.
Okay.
It's better ask philosophers about that. But what I want to say is that what is the method for dialectical thinking in philosophy? It cannot be the method of studying in psychology, because psychology is not dealing with the universal. Psychology is dealing with a specific phenomena which called human consciousness, human mind, human psyche. So we cannot directly apply universal laws to study the processes. So that's why it should be general methodology, which helps us to understand better the processes in that field we are studying. That's why Vygotsky said we cannot apply directly dialectics to psychology. We need to create an intermediate theory and methodology which will give us a kind of direction of how we can apply this general methodology into our field, specific. Because as Marx did with the analysis of society, he did not apply directly the dialectics. He applied dialectics through the analysis of Das Kapital, the production, developing specific concepts like commodity, productive forces, so which are related to the analysis of the society, of the development of the society. I'm not discussing whether Marx was correct or not, wrong or right. I'm discussing that Vygotsky said that psychology needs its own Das Kapital.
If somebody else aside from Vygotsky had the same plan, had the same objective, to apply a version of dialectics to psychology, would that person have likely arrived at the same conclusions that Vygotsky did?
Oh, that's a kind of rhetoric question. We can only speculate, but
I guess it's an opinion question.
Speculation is not my field. What I want to say that at that time, we have to look historically again. At that time, the 20s, 30s, 1920s, 1930s, in the Soviet Union, was a lot of interest to Marx, Hegel through Marx, Marxism, and there were different slogans how to build Marxist psychology, and there were different opinions like Kornilov's Marxist psychology, Alvin Zalkin, and many. So there were different approaches, and Vygotsky was very critical to those. He said that, what does it mean, Marxist psychology? It should not be Marxist psychology. It should be a objective science, and then let's next generation call it Marxist or non-Marxist. From Marx and Hegel, he took the method, the dialectical method of analysis, and was thinking how to apply this method, how to make it methodology, which can give a direction of experimental and theoretical studies of development of human consciousness as a system of functions, as an organical system of functions, according to dialectics of development. That was his task all the time, and he was very, very familiar, even more. He knew very deeply, he understood very deeply dialectics, Hegel, because of his education, and of course Marx. So it was not just a slogan for him, just everybody is doing Marxist psychology. No, he was not a fashion for him. For him, that was kind of real academic scientific problem. How to implement the dialectics of development into this specific field, which is called human development, cultural development, or psychological development.
From what I understand, he was very aware of the possibility of like confirmation bias and motivated reasoning and things like that. He was very aware how other people were cherry picking quotes, cherry picking support, and he was really like consciously resistant of doing that.
Yes. Yeah, he even said that I don't want to learn from Marx by clipping different quotes together. I want to learn on the whole Marx method.
Can you try to explain something to me as best you can? The idea of a nexus of elementary functions reorganizing or somehow rearranging themselves into a qualitatively different result. Can you make that like is there a visual that we can create out of that?
Well, it will take probably in half an hour or 1 hour to explain the dialectics of higher psychological functions and lower psychological functions.
But am I correct to think that the nexus of elementary functions are existing lower mental functions that somehow like rearrange or reorganize in some way, resulting in a higher mental function, or not?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes and no. Why? Because higher psychological functions are not the continuation of the lower ones. The psychology before Vygotsky considered that higher psychological functions are just simply developed lower ones. Lower ones develop, and they are becoming the higher psychological functions. Vygotsky said, no. Higher psychological functions are not the results of growing or improving or advancing the elementary functions, because higher psychological functions originate outside human brain, outside human body. They originate in the social relations. So they are coming from the social relations. They are internalized, they are becoming, but at the same time, while they internalize, they are reorganizing the lower functions. Lower functions begin to be the part of the higher mental functions, but working to support the higher ones. So this is what we can say nexus, but I think it's not nexus might be not the best word here. It might be the melt or the merge or this system. For example, let's take an example. Let's take attention.
Okay.
As a psychological process, as a psychological function. Of course, everybody knows that there are two types of attentions. Involuntary attention, which happens when something happens and I look and it attracts my attention. It's involuntary, so it's not an unconscious, but involuntary. We can call this type of attention like an elementary psychological function because it's stimulus response. Noise, somebody cries, or somebody opens the door, something like that. So it can be completely explained by stimulus response. We don't need to apply big theories to understand that the noise, the sound comes to the room and then comes to my ear and then transforms into neurous impulse and then I talk. So this is explanation. So, but there is another type of attention called voluntary attention. What is voluntary attention? Voluntary attention is that I myself control my attention. I command myself to keep attention, to be attentive for quite a long period of time. So it means that I'm managing my as Vygotsky call it, behavior. I keep myself attentive, not because of the external stimuli, but because my decision, for example, I'm speaking to Anthony, I have to keep focus on the topic. Okay, so this is, I'm using my attention, and you are using your attention voluntarily, consciously, deliberately. You keep yourself attentive. So this is a different type of attention, right? Voluntary attention. But this is a part of our conversation, because in our conversation, our attention, our memory, our thinking involved. Okay, so this is a cultural form of attention. Okay, because we have developed these higher mental functions, which is called cultural or voluntary attention. It helps us to organize our behavior, organize our conversation, and organize our interaction and activeness. Okay, so, but does it mean that we don't have any more involuntary attention?
Of course we do.
Yes. You see, negation of the negation. On one hand, involuntary attention becomes the part of the new system of higher psychological functions. And it works because we then can control and keep our involuntary attention as long as we want. On the other hand, it does not disappear. It still remains. And when there is some unexpected sound on the left, on the right, I turn. So this is, so if higher psychological functions is the results of development of lower ones, which means that lower ones are developing, disappearing, and becoming the higher ones. But that's not the story. We still have involuntary attention, and we do have the voluntary attention, which sometimes includes this involuntary attention. But involuntary attention can work individually. So lower functions can remains the lower function, and might be working as a part of the higher ones. That's the dialectics. That's the example. I don't know how it is.
No,
does
that's
it,
great.
Does it give an answer?
Yeah, I think I'm following you 100%. Absolutely.
Okay.
And
So,
I think maybe at another time, I'd love to talk to you about possible ways of helping that function develop for people who just for whatever reason are struggling with is it struggling to develop it? Is it naturally having a hard time developing it? Is it lacking motivation? Is it lacking?
So to answer this question, we need to do a kind of analysis. We have to work with these people and understand where is the reason, what happened. Maybe they were not good in internalizing the external forms of voluntary attention. Maybe they have no internal tools. They have no internal instruments. So there might be lots of different reasons. But and for example, brain disorder might be one of the reasons also, because brain also participates. We are not excluding brain from psychological activity and psychological functions, of course. But the hope Vygotsky gives us is that as high psychological functions are social by their origins, so through the changing of social conditions, we can then support if there is a problem with the development of higher psychological function. It gives us a great hope instead of taking a medicine to activate your brain.
Yeah.
So to reorganize the whole system, to make it a system of the conditions which support or support to overcome the deficit somehow, to reconstruct, to compensate, might be a much better way. And Vygotsky did it, and he established the discipline called defectology. And if you look at Collected Works Volume 2, the whole volume is the foundations of defectology. And the main idea of defectology is that there is a primary defect, primary disorder, or primary disability, and a secondary disability. Secondary disability is a social. And to compensate primary disability, we need to change the social situation, and then it will be the compensation of the primary one. And these ideas were revolutionary at the time. And now almost everybody in special education is thinking about that. But these ideas were formulated and developed almost 100 years ago. Yeah. But it's another story.
Yeah. And I had one more quick question before moving on. Is social relations somewhat analogous to heat, like the property of heat, in terms of its effect on water? For instance, like introducing heat into freezing water is going to transform the water into a different substance altogether, or maybe removing heat is going to transform a liquid into a solid, or maybe eventually a solid into a gas. I'm only asking that because I was trying to read up on the concept of quantitative to qualitative changes, and that was supposedly like one of the easier metaphors to use to explain it. Is that making any sense?
Yes, of course. But sometimes analogies and metaphors are good, but they all are limited.
Yes,
That's why I try to escape, because sometimes people are taking metaphors very literally. And one of the metaphors which was taken literally was one of Vygotsky's metaphor. Vygotsky says, in ZPD, what the child can do in cooperation today, the child will do tomorrow. But Vygotsky definitely doesn't mean literally today or tomorrow. It might happen tomorrow, it might happen in a week, it might happen in a year. So that's why I prefer not to put too much metaphors. But if there is a metaphor, just to explain correctly that this metaphor is about this and that and that. So yeah, that's my. I just try to be very careful about.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah, because metaphor is deep. That's why it might be understood differently. Sometimes even wrong.
Well, so, I'm definitely in the pseudo concept stage for most of these terms.